Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Black History Looking to the Future webinar. I hope everybody's well. My name is Zara Khan. I work for the Walsall for All team, and I'm joined by Jayshree Patel, who works for the Faith and Belief Forum, and we will be your facilitators this evening. This webinar is the culmination of a month of activity to celebrate Black History Month. In light of recent events, we feel this year presents an opportunity to celebrate the enormous contribution of Black communities to Walsall and to look more closely at Black perspectives, past, present, and crucially, future.
So as the title suggests, we are going to be asking our speakers to talk about their vision for the future. So each of our speakers will speak for 5 to 7 minutes, after which we will ask them a question. After we've heard from everybody, we will then open up the floor to all of you, and we will take some questions from the audience. So please do write down your questions in the Q&A in the toolbar. If you have a question for somebody in particular, please write their name before the question. And if it's for the panel in general, please write panel before your question so we know who you're wanting to direct your question to. So I am going to ask Andre first to share his story and to share his first 5 to 7 minutes presentation. So thank you, Andre. Please come up and welcome.
Thank you, Jayshree. Can you guys hear me? Everything right? Okay. My name's Reid. I'm a designer from Walsall. I've lived in Walsall for the last 4 years, and I'm developing a project at the moment called the People's Studio, which aims to reimagine Walsall. I'll start just with my journey. I've spent the last 8 to 10 years in creative provision, trying to create access to spaces for entrepreneurs, creative individuals, people from underserved backgrounds to access creative facilities, spaces, resources, and help generate and create experiences that help shape the way that we feel in the town. I've spent a lot of time working in Birmingham, Manchester, and all across the UK, working with communities to generate different ways of looking at towns and how we think and feel about them, and started a company called Kiondo in 2017, which is all about how we look at, sorry by the way guys, just a bit unwell, how we co-create the city. One of my big aims and big questions is really looking at why underserved and underrepresented groups are the least involved in shaping how our cities are created, and looking at why development is more likely to negatively impact people from underserved backgrounds, so migrants, the Black community, people that are less likely to be involved in architecture, design, planning, urban regeneration. Now, the work that I'm doing in Walsall is all about switching that, changing that. There's been people doing amazing things in Walsall for generations, for years, trying to think about how to revolutionize the town, how to bring a spark back, how to create a vibe that really inspires the future generation and creates resources that build upon or just help make this town into a better place. So earlier this year, even within the pandemic of COVID, we've taken on what was the old Hobbs Head, a beautiful space just opposite the town hall, that's been derelict or been vacant for the last 10 years. And we're looking at turning this into a cultural venue, a cultural hub, a creative hub for the people here in Walsall, working with and for like the people that have been doing this for years. We've started developing key strategic partnerships with Walsall Council, some of the local actors, some of the local orgs, such as WHG, and starting to develop further relationships into the Walsall All partnerships. And our aim is essentially to help move Walsall into the future. So when I talk about that, I'm talking about how do we create, I'm talking about what if Walsall was green? What if local people could decide what the streets look like? What if we could have festivals? What if we could have festivals on the streets that were co-created by the residents? What if we could start to reuse the canals and all the great people that have been speaking about these things could find ways to actually mobilize these ideas. My work is there to help generate those possibilities, to help negotiate the kind of curiosity, the kind of imagination that all the local people have been thinking and dreaming about, for, as I said, for generations, and have those really difficult and hard conversations with some of the bigger organizations that have been doing the work but haven't always heard those voices, haven't been able to kind of put them into the right, help those dreams come to fruition. We've started the work on creating the space just outside the town hall, with the hopes of opening it in the new year, in spring. And we've got a lot of work to do. We're going to be bringing people in on that. We've started a lot of work around building a digital arts map and creative map of all the creative provision that already exists in Walsall, all the amazing people, actors, movers and shakers, creative hubs, different creative practices that exist in the town. We've also started to look at how we look at community sustainability, healthy, happy communities, looking at nutrition, looking at mental well-being, looking at programs around local authorship, looking at programs around the stories and the communities of the communities that have gone unspoken, unrecorded, undocumented. Our work in Kiondo and in the People Studio project is to help magnify and embrace and celebrate all the things that make Walsall great. And essentially, to do this, it requires us to invest in spaces for the people that are led by the people. And that's what I'd like to share with you today.
So thank you, Andre, for sharing, and it was great to hear about your vision for Walsall. So I have a question for you, which is inspired by my work. So I work for the Faith and Belief Forum, which is a charity that brings people together from different faiths, beliefs, cultures and identities. And so on that idea of bringing people together from across all different backgrounds, I'm interested in your thoughts around this idea of the political blackness. So in the 80s, we heard a lot about political blackness, where different BAME communities came together in solidarity, and we hear much less about it now. So I wondered what you thought, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about the idea of communities coming together. Do you think there needs to be more solidarity between different communities? And is that something you see in the creative arts scene that you work in?
Well, definitely, there are challenges between how different communities feel about the resources that are allocated towards them that they're able to access. In the Black community, there is definitely a sense of being locked out of certain opportunities, or having to go through gatekeepers in order to access resources. Then what happens is there tends to be distrust towards certain gatekeepers or people that are allocated those resources. So if a single person becomes the point of entry, it automatically polarizes the experience for the communities on the other side. I do believe that communities have, by default, will come together because there is a common denominator, which is there is a lack of. And because there is that lack of, there are certain things that we can do to kind of bridge the gap so that everybody, or how I see it, is that everybody eats, because that's one of the core, I guess, principles is how do we make sure that everyone eats? How does everyone survive this journey that we're on? And how do we create a place where we can coexist, but we can exist within our own identities, within our own space, within our own feelings of how we want to experience the world. One of the ways that we look into this is this kind of thing around rituals and culture. So every community has their own rhythms throughout the week, different things that they do, different places that they go, different food that we eat. And so when we're developing the programs for the People Studio and all the things that we're doing within that space in the hub, we're going to be looking into how people's day-to-day, how different communities' days to days are shaped, and build the programs around that so that it makes it feel like home, no matter a home away from home, no matter where or when you come in.
Great, thank you so much. So you're seeing the hub as a place that can actually bring communities together and start creating some of that solidarity, especially in the creative arts. Great, thank you. So if anybody else would like to ask a question directly to Andre, please do write it in the chat, and we will come back to Andre and the whole panel at the end of the webinar. So thank you, Andre, for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Our second speaker this evening is Michelle Cummings, Children's Champion from Walsall Council. So welcome, Michelle, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Right, so my name's Michelle Cummings, and I'm the Children's Champion for Walsall's Care Experience Young People. I'll tell you a little bit about my journey, how I actually reached to be the Children's Champion. I've had many years of experience as a skilled practitioner working with children and young people and families before they've entered into the care system and after they've been in the care system. I'm a really big advocate of promoting children, young people and families about hearing their voices. I think that's so important, and I think along the way on my journey there was times when young people didn't feel that they were actually listened to or they were actually heard. So, you know, being the children's champion is an ideal role for me. So, you know, you want to know, what does a children's champion entail? Well, the children's champion's role, it's quite multifaceted, and I have to say it's an absolute great role, and it's an honour and a privilege to be a children's champion, and I embrace that role, and I love to say I'm the children's champion. The children's champion is about empowering young people, promoting their self-esteem and confidence, getting them involved, hearing their voice, not just hearing the voice but acting upon what they actually have to say, getting involved in improving the services that they access, because when you have a service, if you've got people who are accessing the service, it's important that you actually hear their voice. What's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, was they actually listened to? Because if you want a good service, you need to improve the people accessing the service. And with young people, because young people have got so much to offer, they've got so much to give, and it's important that we actually hear that. Working with young people, it's about letting them understand about their rights. Young people have 42 rights, but with rights becomes responsibility. So it's important that we ensure they understand that it's not just about rights, it's the responsibility as well. We work across the service. When we say about young people influencing the service, we do that in a variety of ways, and this could include, because they have to implement policy change, because it's about children and young people's lived experience. So they might be involved in the interview process. So any professionals that's going to be coming to Walsall that's going to be working with young people, they're interviewed with professionals, and they're also interviewed by young people as well. And this is quite empowering for young people, because they learn new skills. And it's a two-way process. But so they're involved in who actually comes to work for Walsall, and they can share that at the end of the interview. So that's one way they actually influence the service. We've got young people who have been involved in inspecting services as well. So you know, they've gone round, they've went to A&E, they've gone through to CAMS, Children and Mental Health Services, and they've inspected it. Is it young people friendly? Is it, what are we giving a service to our young people? Is it effective? So young people can have their say, and we can feed that back. And hopefully, and I will say hopefully, when we hear what the young people say, changes have been made. I think, I mean, if I just digress and I go back, because one of the reasons why I have this role is because it's so important you hear what young people say. When I think back to when I was young, children were seen and not heard, but it's so important that children are seen and definitely heard. Now, when I was young, I didn't have anyone to actually hear my voice. It was, you basically got on with it. But it's different now, and it's so important that we do hear what young people have to say. And also, legislation tells you that. Article 12, any decision makings that's involving young people that adults make, young people have a right to be listened to, and it's important that you remember that. Article 12, because not all young people know that. So one of the things a children's champion does is actually promote the rights for young people, so get them to understand about their rights. So yeah, so we do lots of things as a children's champion. So it's, as I said, it's quite a multifaceted role. And as I said, why do I do what I do? I do what I do because it's so important that we invest in our young people. What you actually put in is what you get out. And for me, when you invest in our young people, because our young people are the future, and sometimes young people have a raw deal, and that's what I don't want that to happen. I want young people to be confident, articulate, young people with aspirations and ambition, and that's one of the things that I want to promote, and I do promote, and I would like that as my vision, to embed that in practice, so all professionals actually champion the rights of young people. So, you know, participation isn't just one person, it goes right the way across the service. So, you know, young people are our future. So yeah, that's my vision, and I think we should always promote what young people do, because as I said, they often get a raw deal. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's very obvious that you're really passionate about, you know, and we've had these conversations before because we've worked together, haven't we, about you know, youth voice and that sort of thing. And obviously I'm really into and passionate about that sector as well. So I've got a question for you. So we're obviously aware that the last several months have been really challenging for young people, and you know, for various different reasons, you know, education, you know, sort of being blamed potentially for rising COVID cases, going back to uni, not having the support. There's lots of different things going on. So I'm interested in the conversations you've been having with young people, and in particular interested to hear your thoughts about how early we should be talking to children about race and racism, and what you think is the best or most skillful way to do that.
I think from a young person is able, or a child is able to communicate, I think it's important that we have all different types of conversation, age appropriately, because children will actually see what's around them, and they will hear adults talking. So I think from you can have a conversation with a young person, as long as it's age appropriate. I think you can have those on conversation. I think early intervention is the key, because sometimes we leave things too late. So that for me, the earlier the better, but you have to make sure that it is age appropriate for young people to understand, because I think sometimes we underestimate young people, because they're quite intelligent, and they see things obviously they see things differently, but conversations can be quite interesting, and young people will actually say as it is, where sometimes professionals might go about it a different way, but young people will just be straight and just say as it is, because that's what they're actually seeing. So the earlier the better, Zara. I think it's important, and always age appropriate, so they can actually understand.
Absolutely. No, I think I agree with that as well. In terms of, you know, young people are, you know, like you said, they're brilliant. They'll sort of say it straight, really, won't they?
Yeah.
I think we always like that, don't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, thank you very much for that. Jayshree?
So I'd like to introduce our third speaker, who is Chief Inspector Rod Rose. He is from Walsall's Neighbourhood Policing Unit at West Midlands Police. So welcome, Rod.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you for that nice welcome. I've had a few technical issues and I actually logged myself out, but I'm back here as if by magic. Hope you can hear me and see me okay. So as the introduction said, I am currently temporary Chief Inspector with West Midlands Police, and I've been with West Midlands Police now for just over 26 years. So I've done some reflection lately, because I'm coming to the end of my policing career, given that we do a 30-year career, so I'm coming to the end of it. Thinking about why I joined the police and what I hoped to see before I finish with the police. I'll start with the end really, because it links in with what this is about, and it's about looking at the future. So what I would like to see before I finish my time with the police is better representation for BAME officers in senior leadership roles, management roles within policing. So if I said that there's only ever been one black chief constable in my service, so in 26 years, one black chief constable, and he retired 10 years ago, and there hasn't been a replacement for him, that sort of highlights for me the issue and the questions that should be being asked by those in positions, in high positions within government and within policing. I'll now go back to the beginning about when I joined. So I went from a teenager, if you like, being chased by the police, not doing anything serious by, a bit mischievous, that was all, a bit noisy, hanging on the street corners, to being stopped and searched disproportionately, I would say, by white male police officers in the main. Never really given any rationale as to why I was being stopped, but I was just, you know, part of a group, got pulled over, got stopped. Never really had any animosity towards the police, but it did frustrate me. The fact that sort of behaviour was happening time and time again. I then got a job, got myself a car, would get stopped in my car for no reason again. So again, more frustration. But again, it didn't put me off the police. You know, I just see people as individuals, and there are obviously a few bad apples in whatever organisation that there are. So when it came to looking at a career choice, I sort of fell into the police by accident, really. I wanted something that offered me some security, something where, without saying too corny and cliched, I could make a difference, and making that difference from within. Because for me, we can all stand on the sidelines shouting how bad things are, but I like to sort of involve myself and change things from within. So actually, I thought back then, if I become a police officer, I had all these visions about what I was going to do when I joined the police, and aspirations, some of which I've attained, some of which I haven't. But I just thought, actually, rather than just stand there, think that all police are racist, all police are horrible, I want to have a look at it from within. Didn't mean I had to stay within this occupation if I didn't like what I saw. But actually, I've been here for 26 years now, so that sort of tells a tale about the fact that I have enjoyed that service. Would I try and convince you that it's brilliant and it's perfect? Absolutely not. There's lots of issues still going on. So I'll fast forward from 26 years ago when I joined to today, when I've been reminded twice I've been at Walsall now for about 12 weeks. Twice I've been reminded by people that I am the only black male officer at Walsall in the whole of the area. Bear in mind, geographically, it's a massive area. So, you know, year 2020, how can there be only one black male officer within Walsall? It sort of puzzled me. No, that's not something I asked. Actually, people approached me just to tell me that, you know, that is the situation. So what would I like to see for the future, not just for Walsall, but for West Midlands Police, is more officers of colour. I think we've got to join the police to make that change. And I get what we've seen through the summer in terms of Black Lives Matter, the killing of George Floyd, the police brutality messages that are going out on the media consistently. I can understand why people wouldn't want to see the police as a career, or your families don't. But again, it goes back to that, making that change. Myself, in my career, I joined when I was 22. I'd done a little bit of military service. I was sort of quite naive when I joined the police. I started in the city centre of Birmingham, Walsall Heath, Sparkhill, Sparkbrook. And I often get asked, actually, about the racism that I've received as a police officer. And interestingly, I can probably count on one hand how much racism I've received off white and Asian officers. My racism tends to come from, sorry, members of the public, that is not police officers. My racism tends to come from the black community. Certainly when I worked in Walsall Heath in Birmingham, lots of issues there being called coconut, bounty, sellout, etc., etc. To the point where actually some people had to be bailed to stay away from me with conditions because they were threatening me because I was arresting them for obviously, well, for drug matters, and they just wanted to do me harm, shall we say. And I'm going back to sort of the late 90s and the 2000s now, so things may have changed. But again, that didn't put me off. Disappointing, really, that I've got that negativity from the community. When again, going back to what I was saying, it's only the community that's going to change the police. The police isn't going to change on itself. We've got to sort of encourage the young people into the police service, and it is happening, albeit far too slowly. The PCC says that he wants 1,000 BAME officers out of the 3,000 officer uplift. I think we're struggling, if I'm honest with you, to get them numbers. So, you know, I'm a parent. Would I stop my child joining the police? No. I wouldn't necessarily stop them. I think there's other careers out there that I would encourage them to do, but I wouldn't stop them joining the police. It's been a great career in some aspects. I've been able to go and work overseas. I've worked all over the Midlands. I've worked all over the country. The issues I've faced, which I've touched on before the presentation to my colleagues, is the progression. I've really struggled to get above that glass ceiling. I know we've got another speaker on here who's got a lot of service and was a senior officer, but there's not many senior officers within the police, black senior officers within West Midlands Police at the moment. We've managed to just get one assistant chief constable who got promoted this year. Prior to that, you know, it's probably double figure since you've had an ACC, as we call them, of colour within West Midlands Police. So there is lots of work to do. There's lots of officers of colour within the police that want the community to join us, to give us that strength, to give us that diversity within the organisation, because we need to reflect the communities that we serve. That goes back to the Pelian principles of the 1800s. If we don't reflect the communities that we serve, then we're not really legitimate, is what I would say. And that cultural competence is being talked about now. It's actually being recognised that, you know, people of colour do bring that cultural competence, which is so critical to policing the streets of Birmingham and the West Midlands. And that's my 7 minutes. Thank you.
Amazing, right on time. Thank you, Rod. That was really interesting to hear your trajectory. So you were saying that you're really interested in this idea of increasing representation amongst black officers in particular in the police force. And I understand you're doing a master's as well alongside.
Yes.
So I'd be really interested to hear what can we do? What are the steps that can be taken? So I understand the police service is trying to do things at the moment. So it would be interesting to hear what's actually tangibly going on to assist that. And in addition to that, what else do you think needs to happen? Does it need to start really young, going into schools, or are there myriad factors that could support this?
So we've got the Positive Action team that have been around for a few years now, and they actually go into colleges, secondary schools, putting that positive image and promoting the police as a career for people of colour. They offer mentoring. They will take potential applicants through the recruitment procedure, so it's not alien to them. So you know what the tests are going to be like. They don't guarantee a pass. We can't do that. We can't. You know, we're not changing standards here. We're just giving an insight into what a policing career can offer, and some, as I say, some mentoring to assist them through the recruitment process. But it doesn't come with a guaranteed pass. Diversity and inclusion, as you probably imagine, has been on our agenda for a long time. I have to say, cynically, it's a bit of a fad. Sometimes it comes and it goes, depending on what the government spotlight is at the moment, at any particular moment. It is actually at the moment very and truly on diversity and inclusion. And I've got to say, West Midlands Police have done quite a lot on procedural justice. So making sure that, you know, we treat the public with the dignity, respect and the fairness that we should. You know, we've got body-worn video cameras now that have come out, so that we not only can we monitor how we treat the public, but the public have, you know, recourse that if they have been treated in an unfair and unjust way, it's recorded and we can use that as and when we need to. It works both ways, really. You know, we get, I've not long been in our professional standards department where we get allegations against officers, but actually when we look at the video, you know, that interaction bears no resemblance to the complaint that's been made. But it does come in handy when we have had an allegation made and the video substantiates it. And that's just another way where we're trying to get that bit of legitimacy and that bit of trust with the community. So, you know, work is being done, but I think what I don't think helps is when people show an interest in the police and they are shot down, so to speak, or put off that as a career. And you know, having done my initial studies around my dissertation, you know, that is highlighted as one of the problems. It's the pressure from family and friends not to join the police. And I think that's where we need to change it, because we need to set the mindset that if we are going to change the police, we need to encourage our young people into the organisation or the institution and start from within.
Great, thank you. That was interesting to hear about the outside factors as well that are impacting on people's choice to be police officers. And I wonder whether you could just say a few words briefly about the glass ceiling. So is there anything that could support black police officers to get into more senior roles? What kind of support and what kind of initiatives could maybe make that more possible and more frequent?
So we have the Black and Asian Police Association, we've got the Sikh Police Association, we've got the Muslim Police Association today there, and they do a lot of work with the BAME officers to try and prepare them for the promotion boards. I touched on two words: cultural competence. It's been ignored. It's been ignored for many years, but it's starting to focus now in our assessment centres. I still don't think everybody gets it. And again, an example, so I just recently took the promotion process for Chief Inspector. I didn't get through. Some of my feedback I got, apparently I was too black in one of the assessment centre stations. Now, the theme was Black Lives Matter. Now, I got that feedback just last week and I'm probing into it really, but that's the mentality of some of the senior officers. That was a senior officer apparently made that comment and wrote it down that I was too black. So, you know, there's still a long way to go for people to understand the cultural competence and the value that people of colour can bring to this organisation. But there was a lot of work being done by the support or staff associations to help us get to them senior positions. But it is a battle.
Thank you so much for that insight from of what it's like to be a black officer in the police service. And it sounds encouraging, and it also sounds like you said, that there's still things that can be improved. Yes. That need to be worked on. But thank you so much for your contributions, and we'll come back with more questions for you at the end of the webinar. Thanks.
Our fourth speaker this evening is Keith Fraser, Chair of the Youth Justice Board of England and Wales. Keith previously worked for West Midlands Police. So welcome, Keith, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be back. As Rod said earlier on, I think outside of shot, I used to work in Walsall, so it's feeling like sort of like home from home, really. What I'd like to talk about over the next 7 minutes or so is just share my journey with you, but also present a challenge to you, and this will be my vision. It's about people realising that the most powerful tool at their disposal is themselves, and I don't feel that people are always making the best of that tool that they have, the best of themselves, and I use myself as a classic example of this. I also had a bit of a question around the need for Black History Month and events like this, but after asking that question, speaking to a number of people about it, I feel there's a real massive need for events like Black History Month to actually carry on. Black history is not something which exists in a parallel universe. Black history is part of history, but it's a part of history that's not always visible. And I feel that lack of visibility of Black history also plays out sometimes into how Black people view themselves. So they actually limit their own perspectives on what they can reach and also on what they can achieve. And also that lack of visibility can also impact on the perception of others outside of Black communities on what Black people are able to achieve. So I think that events like this are absolutely fantastic, definitely needed, and it's really important to show that Black history is not something that exists outside running along in a parallel track. It is actually part of history and is helping to shape history and helping to shape the future. So the challenge I'm putting to all of us, including myself, is that the most powerful tool at your disposal is you. And there's a formula that I'd like to share with you in a short while. But before I do that, I wanted to share a quote from Maya Angelou. And she was a Black female poet, author, academic. I'm not quite sure. She's an absolutely remarkable woman, the things that she's actually done and she's actually achieved. And I find this one to be an absolute inspiration. And many of the words that she comes out with really resonate with me and help me in relation to keeping motivated and helping me to make sense of the world around us. And she said, if you're always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. So how much of our time do we spend trying to fit in with others around us rather than trying to be ourselves and being the best of ourselves? And I think those words are really, 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 really powerful. Now, what's that formula I was telling you about earlier on, it's actually more of you to be you, really simple, and it's based around the words more, and it's M for motivation, O for optimism, R for resilience, and E for excitement. And I try to use that simple formula in my own life in order to move forward, help me through difficult situations, help me to deal with some of the challenges, and help me to really keep excited about the direction in which I'm going in. And I'll tell you more about that formula in a little bit more detail as I journey through today. What's one of the things that I think is holding us back the most and holds people back the most? It's fear. It's fear. Now, if you stop and think for a few moments, what are the things that you're scared of? It could be you're scared of the dark, you're scared of crowded places, you're scared of standing out in work, you're scared of being different, you're scared about asking a particular question. It's fear. And how do you feel when that fear besets you, when that fear comes over you? It's quite a strong, powerful feeling, isn't it? You know, inside your heart might start to kind of beat a little bit faster. You might start to shake a little bit. You might start to recall, you might start to speak even faster or lose a little bit of control over your own, you know, your own limbs and stuff like that. Or you might want to run from a particular situation. But everybody's fear is different. Some things will all be, you know, we might be all be scared of, like if you're in a life-threatening situation, for example, that's obviously fearful. But not all of us will be scared of the dark. Not all of us will be scared of talking in public. Not all of us will be afraid of being different in work or speaking out in work or being ourselves in work. So what is it about fear and how it manages to have such control over us? I think it's because we don't recognise it. And for me, there's good fear and there's bad fear. There's good fear, is the fear that alerts you to danger, because that's what fear is about, and you react to that accordingly. But there's also bad fear, and the bad fear is the fear that stops us from progressing, stops us from being ourselves, and stops us from being true to ourselves. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to think about that time when you're preventing yourself from being yourself, from asking that question in work you think you should be asking, applying for that job that you think you should be applying for, is go for it. And I'm going to ask you to be comfortable about being uncomfortable. Think about it. Be comfortable about being uncomfortable, because once you get into that uncomfortable zone, that fear zone about doing something different or stretching your boundaries, that's when you start to grow as an individual. And that's something which they call the confidence cycle. Mark Twain said, a man cannot be comfortable, person cannot be comfortable without his own approval. You need to be satisfied and comfortable in your own skin. So this is about being comfortable in your own skin. Now I'm going to go back to that word more. And the first letter in that, and the first word, was motivation. Now, what does motivation mean? Motivation is a reason or reasons for acting or behaving in a particular way. And I'll use that as a quick example in relation to me and why I wanted to be a police officer. I think that all stemmed from when I was a kid and seeing my parents and the values that they instilled in me, how they used to give selflessly, not looking for anybody else to actually recognise the fact that they're given to others and given to their community. That instilled in me in a very early age to want to give to communities and not necessarily expect anything back in return. That translated into me as an 8-year-old boy wanting to be a police officer. I wrote to the Home Office when I was 14 years of age, filled out an application form, which some kind civil servant replied to with a personal letter giving me more information about joining the police, and then saying, once you're old enough, please make sure you maintain your interest and apply. I did maintain that interest and I applied at 18 and a half years of age. I was successful and got in and went down to London and became a police officer. And that translated on to a 32-year career in the police service, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. Now let's go on to optimism. What does optimism mean? What's optimism mean to you? I'll tell you what the dictionary means, what others interpret it as. It's around hopefulness and a confidence about the future or success of something in the future. Now, if you don't have optimism, you are cutting down and closing down your options. Now, I think that that's something that a lot of us do. Now, I rose to the rank of superintendent, but the first time I went for promotion, I went for the sergeant's promotion. I got through the first 2 tests straight away, and then the final test I failed in year 1, so I had to retake it. Year 2, I had to retake it. 3 years later, after retaking it, I got through. So that was about me having the optimism to kind of look forward and drive myself to actually go for it. Joining the I wanted to apply for to join the serious and organised crime unit at New Scotland Yard, but I couldn't see anybody else up there that looked like me, had my background. I was uniform, a bit of limited experience. I had experience within the CID, but I was uniform, and I'd done all of my time as a detective inspector out on what they called on borough, and not been in any of these specialist departments. So I ruled it out. I didn't think that I could actually, my face would fit in serious and organised crime. But I had a conversation with somebody else who kind of tested me deselecting myself and said, Keith, I think you've got the qualities, go for it. And to cut a long story short, I got the job. I applied for it and got the job. And also the same thing happened to me again when I thought about what I was going to do when I retired. Somebody said to me, why don't you apply to be a board member on the Youth Justice Board? Again, it was full of a whole load of people that didn't look like me and didn't have the same background as me. And I thought I would not be the right person for that job. But people told me they'd be lucky to get you. And to cut a long story short, again, I applied for that role and I got it. So you can see that if I wasn't optimistic or other people hadn't helped me to see the options, I would have deselected myself from an opportunity and not had any chance. Now, what I'm not saying is that you're not going to get everything that you apply for or everything that you want in life. But if you're optimistic and realistic about what you're doing, at least you are keeping your options open rather than saying you can't do it from the start and then you're ruling out all of your options. Now we come to R. I'm
so sorry. I think I'm going to have to cut you off if that's okay.
Oh, right, okay.
Ask a question before we carry on.
Yeah, no, certainly.
Honestly, I could listen to you all day. I'm sure everybody else is the same. I was going to ask you a different question, and now that I've heard sort of what you're talking about, I'm going to ask you something else. So I really think thank you so much for coming on. I think that's been really helpful, really sort of inspirational, I think, and I think particularly if there are any sort of ethnic minority people within the audience tonight, I think that will really resonate with people about potentially holding yourself back because you don't think you're good enough for a certain role, etc.
Yeah.
So taking that into account, and also I think you've picked the wrong career. I think you could be a motivational speaker, to be honest. But taking that into account, have you ever faced imposter syndrome, and how have you overcome that if you have? And if you haven't, how have you sort of been through your career and not faced that, or what kind of techniques have you kind of utilized, very briefly?
I suppose do you mean think your face doesn't fit?
Sort of you're in a position and actually you're thinking, well, I don't know why I'm here, who put me in this position, should I be in this room, that sort of thing.
I suppose I could say that with the current role I'm doing now. Chair of the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales. I actually spoke, I won't go through the actual process itself, I was appointed by the Lord Chancellor in April. And I was having in my prep before, once I found out I got the job, obviously I spoke to a number of people in relation to that job, what you need to do to be a chair of this organisation that's got responsibilities across England and Wales, talks to cabinet ministers, met people at the top of government, etc., etc. And I really was thinking, good grief, am I really the right person to be going and talking, doing this job? What do I need to be a chair? How should I act? How should I perform and stuff like that? And somebody said to me, Keith, they've asked you to do the job for you, for the qualities that you've shown. You don't need to go on there and behave like the last person or 2-3 people beforehand. You don't need to go on there and behave like any other chairs of any other organisations. You need to go on there and be you. And that's the reason why you were selected. And that has really resonated with me and helped me through, actually, in relation to being comfortable around being the chair of this and the head of this organisation for England and Wales.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Keith. Yeah, I feel like we need to have a chat outside of this forum, because I feel like you could really help me a lot, and I'm sure a lot of other people as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to pass on to Jayshree now.
Great. So I would like to introduce our final speaker of the evening. So we have Jennifer Beth Blake, who is the director of the Change Partnership Limited. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy and delighted that leadership has taken a position, not only with the previous speakers, but specifically with some of the things that I'd like to say. But before I do that, I think I'd like to acknowledge some great leadership that has happened to get us here, not just by the council and other partner employees who are helping us here tonight, but for 2 people who created Black History Month. I know that we're here and we're kind of focused on the areas that we're focused on, but I don't think we should forget that without people like Linda Bellos and Ade Sibo, we would not be here for Black History Month, because in 1987, they took a leadership seat, whether that was a positional seat or whether they took that seat and created in the UK Black History Month. So that's a fantastic example of great leadership, and I'd like to kick off my segment with that. Excuse me. So thank you. A little bit about me. I've been working for the public sector now for 30+ years. For the last 15 years or so, I've been focused solely on management and leadership development, and also acting as an interim manager through my business, which you kindly mentioned is Change Partnership Limited. But the 2 areas that I'd like to focus on tonight are not the employed roles that I took as a manager within the public sector, or my role as director in the business. The 2 areas that I'd like to focus on are in the 1980s, going back quite a bit there, when I was one of the co-founders of Walsall Black Sisters Collective. In reflection, in hindsight, looking back, what I did with my colleagues and friends and others is to occupy a leadership seat that wasn't assigned to me, that wasn't applied for, but which I took on readily. One of the things I recall from back then was when we were thinking about how to organise, one of the things we were looking for was a great leader, a Black great leader who can take us forth and conquer the world and make things better in terms of racism and all sorts of areas. And that person, almost like Martin Luther King style or Malcolm X style, that person was not forthcoming. So after a period of time, we realised that not only was that person not forthcoming, but they wouldn't necessarily understand our struggles and the areas that we'd like to focus on. In addition, the reality is that we don't need just one great leader to move things forward around racism. We need a community of leaders. And that's the thing that I want to focus a little bit about in terms of my experience. So it's not my time as a manager within local government or within the NHS or other public sector organisations, but the first one was Walsall Black Sisters. I occupied a seat that I wasn't invited to occupy in order to get things done. Another time that I did that, and again, I think it's relevant for Walsall Black History event and just Walsall Black History in general, was the authorship and project management of the creation of the book Through Sweat, Tears and Triumphs, the African Caribbean Presence in Walsall. And that book really is an acknowledgement of the Walsall's own Windrush generation, their experiences, how they came here, what they went through, their triumphs, their sweat, their tears. So that's what that book is entitled, and that's what it describes. Their sweat, their tears and their triumphs from the 1950s and 60s when they first came, and their journey throughout. Again, that was a point at which leadership was needed, not just by me, but my co-authors as well. I'm a first generation born in the UK of African Caribbean parents who came from Jamaica. And I knew that if I didn't take the lead, if the other authors didn't take the lead and actually record the stories, the experiences of 30 plus people who lived in Walsall about their migration story, and write that down, document that down and promote that. And that happened twice actually, once in 2001 and our most recent edition in 2017. So those are two examples where leadership wasn't assigned to me. I didn't apply for it, but I took on the mantle. And that's an interesting thing to think about really, because I think some of the other speakers have spoken about it. The way I describe it is contested authority. Sometimes we find it difficult to occupy a leadership seat unless someone invites us to, because sometimes it's about imposter syndrome, which you already alluded to. I called it contested authority. And by that, I mean that we are reluctant to take charge because there may be some credibility gaps in how we perceive ourselves and also how others perceive us. Sometimes to take on a role of manager or leader within an organisation or a particular field can be quite challenging, because not only are you looking at yourself and whether you can occupy that seat, will others accept you, whether that's a community, an organisation, other leaders, you have those hurdles to get over. And so the two examples I give are really to stress really that sometimes you have to take a leadership seat, a leadership position, whether you're invited to or not, whether you're the best person or not. Sometimes you just have to do that to make it happen. And we saw that a bit with Linda Bellos and Ade Siebo. I'm sure that the Black History Month that we're seeing in 2020 is nothing like the Black History Month we've been seeing since 1987. This is on a whole new level. And the reason for that, I think there are probably many reasons, but not least because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the things that are happening and the issues that are being discussed. There's spaces now being created where discussions are taking place that never have taken place before. So even if I think back to Walsall Black Sisters in the late 1980s, I think that we were activists, but we never called ourselves that. I think we were leaders, but we never called ourselves that. I think that we created safe spaces to have discussions about race and gender and leadership and what we need to do to make things better, but we didn't call ourselves leaders or activists or community workers. We just sat in what I now view as a leadership position. Another thing that I'd like to share, I think I've got a slide, I'm not sure whether you're able to share it, a slide that I sent earlier, but that is about two things. What does the data say about lack of Black leadership in the UK, and what are the benefits? So the first one is the data. I'll pick out a few areas around the data. According to research, and this figure that I'm going to share with you, 24 billion, was taken from a report that was commissioned by the government in 2018 and led by a woman called McGregor Smith, and it's called the McGregor Smith Review. And the research indicates that Black leadership, if people are allowed or enabled to fully, not just leadership actually, but the whole Black potential is maximised. The UK could generate 24 billion a year boost to the economy. And I'm giving the examples of the data just to illustrate that it's not just about it's nice to do, isn't it nice to treat people well? It's also a financial imperative that we, one, have Black leaders and that we allow people, BAME, Black people, others, to realise their potential. So 24 billion per year if we do that. Another figure that I've gotten there, and I know time doesn't allow me to go through everything, is first, Birmingham, the West Midlands region, by 2020, which is this year, are likely to be the first majority non-white city region, not only in the UK, but also in Europe. Now that should focus our attention about what needs to be done so that we can maximise the potential, that we can get the boost of into the economy, etc. Some of the other figures, one that I'd like to pull out, that there are about 400 local authorities in the UK, and in terms of chief executives, that number is something like -3, you know, sorry, 3 or less. So that figure is particularly low. The other area that is indicated on the slide is show me the benefits. I think a lot of the times we think of racial inclusion and that type of issue as something that's socially something that we should do. And that slide that that you have in front of you shows that there are some benefits to Black leadership that people need to also focus on. So as well as should do, morally right to do, nice to do, we're obliged to do because of legal reasons, there's also some imperatives that are benefits to organisations, communities and to societies. And I think that that should be more at the forefront of people's minds when they're thinking about why inclusion matters, why engagement matters, and why some of the other things matters. One of the other...
Stop you there, Jennifer.
Yeah.
It's a really nice place to stop, actually. Sorry, we're just running a bit out of time. But the idea that actually there's so many benefits, it's not just some kind of tick box activity that we're doing because we should, but actually there's so much to be gained from being inclusive. So we'll go on to ask you more questions in the Q&A for sure, but just for the time being, I was really inspired by what you said about being the leaders we yearn to find, not only because we can't wait, but also because that's one way of overcoming barriers. And one question I have for you is, when Black people do find themselves in positions of leadership and overcome some of the struggles and the barriers, what kind of things do you think that they need to be aware of once they get there, in terms of things that are specific to Black or BME communities, just things that are in particular affect and are relevant to Black leaders, whether that's challenges or other things that need to be in people's awareness when they get to those positions? What words of advice would you offer?
You don't have to be perfect. I think that speakers have said it well before me, and so I don't want to repeat what they have said. But one of the things that I think that I'd like to share is that you can make a difference. I think I'd like to touch on data because I think it's useful to back up what we're saying so that we don't just become an opinion piece. But research has found that when there are Black leaders in organisations at high levels, they are more likely to share their findings, their experience, and I think we can see that here with others, to inspire them and to promote engagement. That organisations are constantly struggling to increase engagement, increase participation, and one of the things that you can do, and know that you can do as a Black leader, as well as in your job, you can also have an impact on the community by raising engagement, by actively being involved as a mentor and giving back in that way. And I think in that way you acknowledge yourself and others in terms of overcoming what's known as the imposter syndrome. So I do think, first of all, accepting that you are a leader, that you will make mistakes, but who doesn't? But you do have a role to play and you are important.
Great, thank you so much for your time, Jennifer, and thanks for getting us to reflect on that responsibility as well when we do get to those positions. So I'm going to hand over now to Zara for the Q&A, which will involve all of the panel.
Thank you so much, Jayshree, and thank you to all of our speakers. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm sure, you know, I would love to listen to everybody all night. Unfortunately, we just don't have that time. So yeah, we're going to move on to the Q&A now. You've been sending in your questions like crazy. We've got so many questions, so I don't think we're going to be able to get through everything. but we will try our best and hopefully get through as many as possible. So Andre, the first question is for you. So there are a couple of people asking around, Shona and Hannah are asking around the space that you've got, the Hogshead, or what used to be the Hogshead, you know, in the town centre. And, you know, they love that you're focusing on this aspect. They work with young people, and they wondered if your hub would also cater or have certain projects for young people. And will those young people and Black, Asian, minority ethnic young people also have their voices heard? If so, how do you plan on doing this? And she wishes you all the best with a nice little smiley face.
Okay, so young people definitely have to be central to the space. To be honest, it's always been around the intergenerational audience. It's about young as well as old, how the experiences of everyone in the town can come to create a better future. We are thinking of a few things. One of the first is a little concept we've called the Saturday Studio. Now, we've got a load of different tools and different things that I used to use back in the day, doing kind of community arts and things around getting people involved with local making, design, craft, arts, community building, imagining what their streets might look like. And so the Saturday Studio will invite like young people, families down to have a go, play with our laser cutters, play with the 3D printers, have a go, spend some time with some of our creative producers to imagine and dream up kind of project ideas, things that people might want to do in the space, things that people might want to do in the town, and start to kind of help people find ways to action and activate some of those things, whether things require funding or whether there's something that they can do for free with support, with just the right connection. So really, it's just we're gonna just be like your ultimate plug. We're gonna just plug you in, so you can plug in, use our space as a resource. If we're not the right people for it, our point is will be a point of contact to connect people to the people that we know that have connected with us, and just be a really healthy, fulfilling network, really.
Thanks, Andre. So, you know, would it be good, you know, would it be helpful for people to maybe get in touch with you over LinkedIn or wherever it is to kind of, you know, have that conversation about how you can work together, potentially?
Definitely get in contact with me over social media. Easiest thing right now. We are developing a full website for the space and everything. Now that we've got a name, now that we've got all the things coming together, it has been wild. The community have named the space. We've got a name for the project. We've got all sorts of things that have been going on. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. But yeah, there's so much to come. Get in contact with me on social media. I'm happy. We've got a phone number that you can hand out and people can give me a call. I'm really open. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So we're going to be doing a post-webinar email. So all the information will be put in that email and sent out to everybody that's attended today. So please don't worry about kind of, oh, well, I wanted to get in touch with that person, I wasn't able to. We'll be able to point you in the right direction. Jayshree.
Okay, so we had a question. I think it's directed more to Michelle, but I'd like to invite other people to comment if they'd like to. And it's about the fact that we hear this thing in the United States, for example, about having the talk with young Black people, young Black men in particular. And the question is around how relevant that is in the UK. Is it something that you have had to do with either your young children in your family or young people that you work with? So this idea about the talk about the kind of discrimination and racism that they may have to face. So that's open to maybe Michelle first, because that's who it was directed at, and then if anybody else wants to come in.
I think with the talk, I think it's just ingrained that we do it all the time. I do it with my own family members, and I do it with the young people as well. You know, if you get stopped, you know, keep calm. All of it. It's just something that I think I will speak for the people around me. We've all had that talk with our young people, because we are concerned when our young people are out there. Anything could actually happen to them. So that talk is had all the time. Some take it serious, some just shrug it off because, you know, nothing may have happened to them at that particular time when we've had those conversations. So yeah, it's a regular conversation that's had all the time.
Thank you. So it sounds like it's just something that's kind of ingrained almost, and that people become accustomed to. It's part of the kind of unconscious awareness that people have, because it's a reality. Okay, thank you.
So the next question is from Janice, I believe, and this question is for Rod. In 2010, I was involved with West Midlands Police as a community volunteer and sat on recruitment panels to review and encourage more Black, Asian, minority ethnic recruits to the force. This initiative ceased after 2 years as it was just gaining traction. What can be done to reintroduce this?
Personally, I was not involved in that work, so that's a new one on me. But the Positive Action team, I guess I've taken a lot of that work on. Are they out there sort of outreach, engaging with the communities, as I said, into the schools and the colleges, trying to, if you like, promote the positive attributes of policing, what a good career that it can be. So, you know, if she wants to contact me directly, I could link her into the Positive Action team to not only, if you like, sell the excellent work that she does as a volunteer, but see whether there's a place around the table for her now to get involved in that work.
Brilliant, Rod. Thank you for the offer. So, Janice, if you're still watching, we will drop our Walsall for All email address, and we can put you in touch with Rod via that area. So if you just drop us an email at that email address, we'll put you in touch. Jayshree?
Thank you. So I think this this question maybe is more relevant to Keith or to Rod, but it's about the fact that COVID has seen a disproportionate impact on the ME communities, and we've also seen a rise in hate crime. And the question is about, are there some communities that report hate crime less frequently, for example, than other communities, and why might that be? And as this is about Black History Month, can you tell us about the impact on some of our Black communities that hate crime has?
Do you want me to lead on that, Keith?
If you want to start first, Rod, and then I'll pick up on any gaps.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, there's no secret that hate crime nationally has risen, and it's allowed the far right to use their sort of venomous language to promote their ill doing. I was in a meeting today where hate crime was on the agenda. Actually, you know, we haven't got the magic cure for that, I suppose, and spinning it positively, the fact that we're getting them reports in shows that the communities are sort of more and more getting sort of the trust and confidence in the fact they can report it, and that we do take it seriously. And I tell you what, Walsall we do, because I work with the hate crime leader at Walsall, and she's very passionate about the work that she does. So I'll be honest with you, I can't break it down sort of ethnicity by ethnicity, but what I can give that assurance is that we do take it seriously, probably more so than ever, if I'm honest with you. And we deal with it, certainly at Walsall, we deal with it at our priority settings in the morning, at our tasking meetings in the morning, to make sure that every report gets the full attention that it deserves. And all I will happily do is encourage the further reporting of hate crime, because if you don't know, then we can't understand the landscape out there and we can't deal with it. So I'm not going to sit here and say, I hope the numbers reduce. I hope the numbers reduce because we don't get so much hate crime. But if that means that the numbers have to go up and up to tell us what is going on, the true picture of hate crime out there, to allow us to deal with the offending that's going on, then I've got to look at that as a positive. So it's a bit of a double spin on things, really. I think things have got to be reported for the hate crime to get high, to allow West Midlands Police to know what's going on and to give it the appropriate level of response that it needs. And I say, speaking for Walsall, I can tell you now that we do daily look at the hate crime that comes in. And I sit on the Force Tasking Board as well, hate crime features. So we'll be talking about it again on Wednesday at a force level to look at how we can address it. I mean, we have to look at, you know, it's not just the Black community. So we've got the LGBT community as well, that's heavily, sadly, heavily involved in hate crime, and we try and encourage the reporting around that so that we can deal with it. And I'm not an expert in that field, but we have got officers that specialise in dealing with hate crime, not just because they have to, but actually some of them volunteer to do it as a sort of a passion, really, for trying to eradicate hate crime from sort of the streets of West Midlands, really. So I don't know if you want to come in there, Keith. I probably left a few gaps for you.
I'll talk about the COVID part. As you probably heard, there's been a disparity in relation to the impact of COVID on minority communities. And what we're doing at the moment is actually to see if there's any link between the impact of COVID and on minority children from Black minority and ethnic communities. So what there is a possibility there is that it might be an adverse childhood experience, and as a result of that adverse childhood experience that children face, it might lead them to have health inequalities or potentially coming into the criminal justice system. So what we're doing at the moment, and we're spending quite a significant amount of resource and funds, and also working with a couple of boroughs and also with some academic institutions to try and understand the impact of COVID on children, and then in a preventative way trying to stop that from becoming an adverse childhood experience which could have further, lead to further harm on children in relation to health and also potentially coming into the criminal justice system. So that's some preventative work that's being done around COVID at the moment.
Great, thank you, Keith. And I wonder, I know you're not currently working the police service, but do you have any perspectives on why things like hate crime are reported at different levels by different communities? Do you have any thoughts about that?
As Rod has said, I used to lead in relation to repeat victimisation across West Midlands Police, but that was about 4 years ago. At that time, the things that would have an impact on that would be around there's a number of things really. It's one around the police and do people understand the fact that it is an offence and something they should report. People don't always realise that if they've suffered abuse because of who they are or a perception around who they are, that is wrong and it should not be tolerated, should be reported. So one, it's around knowledge. Two, it can be around the lack of confidence in the police that they'll actually take it seriously. But there is a lot of work that's been done by the police, as Rod has said, over the years and over time to actually let people know that the police do take it seriously and it is treated seriously. So it's about encouraging people to actually report it. So one, it's around understanding that it is an offence and it's something wrong that should be reported. And two, there's also a confidence issue as well in relation to the police taking it seriously. There's also sometimes as well an element of people not wanting to talk about something which they see as private. It could be about a disability. It could be in relation to being a member of the LGBTQ community as well, or another minority community that people might not want to talk about. So it's quite a complex issue really in relation to why people don't always report matters when they've been a victim of a hate crime. But the police do work hard with communities and also with partners in order to ensure that there are different ways that people can report and also to increase their confidence to report things to the police.
Great, thank you, Keith, and thank you, Rod, to speaking to that question. And it's encouraging that it's being taken so seriously at the moment. Thank you. So back to Zara.
Brilliant, thank you. So Jennifer, the next question is for you, but just before that, there's a lovely message in the chat for you. So Annette says that she's lived in Walsall for 20 years. She has two sons who are 27 and 31, both accomplished in their own rights and field of work, though they still frown on her for moving from Birmingham to Walsall in the prime of their childhood. Walsall Black Sisters was one of the redeeming factors for them and for me as a mother who could be at work with confidence in the support, guidance and care they received. Thank you. So that's a really lovely message. So just to show the impact I think you have had on people's lives, Jennifer, is very heartwarming, I think, to see. And the question from, they didn't put their name, so it's anonymous. So if this is your question, please do drop it in the chat. Very interesting points, Jennifer. Do you think Marcus Rashford embodies that stepping into the leadership void and can inspire a new generation of Black children and youth to step up and change society for the better?
Yeah, what a great, thank you for the comments from the previous speaker. Absolutely. What a fantastic example of someone just deciding that something needs to be done and just sitting in that leadership seat. Now, whether he thinks himself as a leader or not, because I think sometimes what happens is you do something and you don't think, oh, I know what, I'm going to lead on that. You just take an action. And often it's only in retrospect that you actually realise that you are actually taking leadership. Because if you think about leadership as influencing That's what he's doing. He's trying to influence the government. He's influencing the school, the education, the schooling, poverty. So he's definitely an influencer. And I believe, and I always say that at the end of the day, leadership is all about influence.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I think, obviously Marcus is completely brilliant, and it's really encouraging to see somebody who's got that spotlight, that fame, that sort of element in the media where they have that opportunity to promote issues that really matter to them. And the fact that he's obviously gone through this in terms of free school meals and that sort of thing is, really encouraging to see. Over to you, Jayshree.
Sure. So this is a question to anybody. I think it's relevant to all of you, and it's around Keith's comments about Black history being British history in the context that we're talking about. So the question is, what steps do you think could be taken to make sure that there is wider awareness of Black history, in particular how it's impacted on British history as a whole and the civil rights that we have come to take for granted in some spaces? So what could be done to improve overall understanding and awareness of Black history for all of us?
Can I put my pennyworth in there? I think that when I first got involved in writing the book Through Sweat, Tears and Triumphs, I did think of it as local history, because it was about Walsall, it was about Walsall people, and it was about the Walsall experience. And that was in 2017. It was only a couple, maybe 18 months down the line that I stopped thinking of it as local history and realised that it actually is British history, Caribbean history as well. Because the story, it's like anything. When there's an event in history, it usually happens locally, and then it becomes a national pride or a national story. And I think that whilst there are many, many stories, and it's not just about Walsall, what I do know is that the stories that have come out of Walsall could be replicated in any industrial town in the UK, and there would be very similar stories. So sometimes what we think of as local history is actually much, much bigger than our own region or our own area or our own lives.
Thank you. I really like the way that you talk about that, about how it starts locally and actually the ripple out effects are national and much, much bigger than where they started. Would anybody else like to talk about raising the awareness of Black history as British history before we move on to Zara?
I'd say just a quick one, if I may. It's the point I was saying earlier on, really. At some point, hopefully in the future, it will be seen as history and not something to be promoted separately, because Black people live alongside other people. Black communities are lots and lots of different communities that make up a whole host of Britishness, really, and wider at the end of the day. So the thing that we need to do is carry on talking about it. It should be part of the curriculum. We should make sure that we talk about those local people that my colleague was talking about earlier on. We should be celebrating what people are doing and not be put off from talking about it. People say, why do we have Black History Month? The reason why we have it is because what Black people have done isn't always as visible as it should be. So we should be championing it, we should be lobbying for it, and we should be ensured it's got its right and appropriate place in the history books and is not invisible. And things are getting better, and it's because of events like this, a really, really appropriate title, looking to the future, why things are getting better. So I think it's about more and more people championing how we're all contributing to our society.
Great, thank you, Keith. I really like that idea of celebration, that Black History Month is very much about celebration, and I think that's a really nice note to end on before I hand over to Zara to tie things up.
Would you mind if I just added to that just shortly?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, go ahead, Andre.
I completely agree with what's been said, and just to reiterate that we do need to capture all of these stories and experiences, but they're only as good as if they are part of the academia, if they're part of the actual common knowledge that people fall into. So there are tons of books, tons of things that have been written, but people won't find them, and people won't see it as the overall course of literature around what has happened, what has been happening these entire years, these years that have passed. So we do need to encourage the writing, the reading, the creation, the documenting of new stories from the young all the way up to the old, and make sure we continue to keep building upon the knowledge that is being created every day by people living in Walsall, living across the UK, all the experiences. And then we still need to continue challenging the institutions to make sure that this knowledge doesn't just become a footnote, that these pieces are investigated fully.
Thanks, Andre. I really like the point about valuing those stories. And also, it sounds like you're talking about claiming it for everybody, like this is ours collectively, and really making space for that, whether that's in the curriculum or in wider cultural knowledge. So yeah, thank you for the contribution. Okay, over to Zara.
Thanks, Jayshree. Yeah, I think there's different opinions on Black History Month, really, isn't there? There's the opinion that you know, it should be more than just a month. And a month is not enough to celebrate, you know, the vast amount of Black history that there is in this country, but also that the actual month is really important to kind of move things forward in terms of the Black experience and people's lived experiences in terms of racism and, you know, living within different areas, etc. I'm just going to quickly put in one last question before we tie things up. So Nige has asked, when speaking to people of colour working and living in Walsall, it's clear that the experience is similar and negative. It's naive to think that the structural racism that exists will not impact on lower aspirations and imposter syndrome within people of colour. Keith and Rod's experience is the exception and not the norm, which is where we need to get to. All speakers today are British. However, a position of power perspective would be considered Black first, hence the two Black comment that Rod experienced. Considering recruitment practices, how do we get people of colour into positions of power beyond positive action initiatives? And this is open to anybody to answer.
So it's Rod here. So was the last, how do we get people into positions of power? Is that the question at the end?
Yeah, so how do we, considering recruitment practices, how do we get people of colour into positions of power beyond positive action?
I can't speak for other organisations. I mean, I've done some work across the board with courts, probation, prison service, and the CPS. And, you know, speaking for the criminal justice system, I think the general view is across all of those organisations that Black people do struggle to make the management and senior management levels. Certainly in the policing, as you know, I've touched on the fact that we are doing work within the police to try and address the issue, but I think we've got a long way to go. And I will say this, you know, I'm proud to be a police officer. I do enjoy being a police officer, so please don't think that I'm negative at all. But I just think there's a lot more we could do, and to value the talent, I suppose I would call it, the talent we've got within the organisation, and to see the benefits of that, you know, to use that word again, the cultural competence that people of colour and BAME employees bring and that we can offer, given the diverse communities that we police within West Midlands. I think someone mentioned earlier about how diverse, you know, the Midlands are, probably one of the most diverse places in the UK, actually. So it would make sense for me to have BAME colleagues in senior positions to influence inside and outside, and I think that would only help with the legitimacy and the transparency when dealing with our communities as police.
Fab, thank you so much, Rod. Is anybody else that'd like to make a comment about that question?
Yeah, I'll make a comment in relation to that. Thank you for the question. You know, it is really important to realise that everybody's journey is not the same. But I think one thing that has been the same thing over the kind of 34 years I've been around the criminal justice system is that there have been challenges in relation to recognising diversity and inclusion, but it hasn't always been a priority. And so one of the things that I think is really important is you need some consistency of leadership, a consistency of leadership from the top within organisations. So inclusion, equality, recruitment, retention and progression, they all need to be seen as something important for organisations consistently, and not just in and out as it has been. It's almost been like at Blackpool, Pleasure Beach, you know, sometimes you're on a high on the roller coaster and then another time you're on the low. We need to have some consistency. I don't support this thing in relation, if you're part of an organisation that has diversity inclusion as a golden thread throughout its strategy, it's probably there like that for the right reasons, but I think that needs to be a separate part so that leaders, you know what the leaders in your organisation are focused on. So it's about us challenging ourselves and each other within the organisations that we are part of, and also those people in positions of influence, to ensure that diversity and inclusion, and also around equity, which is what you're after, not about everybody being treated the same, it's about fairness, that's to ensure that people are treated as fairly regardless of their background.
Oh, there's a lots of things that we can do, but one of the main things I think we can do is follow the research, follow the recommendations. There's research out there about things that can happen and steps that can be taken, and I think that's pretty important because it kind of gives you roadmaps of what you might do, and that includes gathering data on your recruitment and your numbers and where you stand, where are you now and where are you going. Monitor the data and how you're making improvements on your recruitment and promotions, etc. I think leaders themselves, who are leaders of leaders, should take accountability and responsibility for making change, and raise awareness about the opportunities for management and leadership. And also examine your recruitment processes, re-examine them, have another look at them. Also, and I think both police officers brought this up, look at your pipeline. Where are your new leaders coming from? And if you can't see them, what are you going to do about that? And then obviously, I think in terms of structural racism, we also need some government support and input and priority around this issue.
Just to add to that, Jennifer, as well, I think it is about that organisational culture, organisational design. A lot of organisations won't shift their perspectives on culture and diversity because inherently they may not understand that they may be racist, and how they're doing that systemically they can't really address. And so it's sometimes required to bring in another organisation in to review that process, to review that system, and to rejig it, to reorganise it. Yeah. I think one of the biggest things we have to address is what is power and where do we want it to come from and what do we want to do with it. I think one of the things we can address is looking at Black leadership and investing in it primarily. If we have good leaders, if we can invest in the leadership, and when we talk about imposter syndrome and all the kind of difficulties young Black leaders go through when they're trying to come up and they're trying to develop these things, these are the investing in Black leadership will be one of the strongest, I think, most fulfilling ways to actually to tackle some of the power dynamics, because it's really about distribution of power more rather than where is the power and what we're going to do with it. Yeah,
definitely. Thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions. That brings us to the end. We are just over time, but I think we can allow it considering how brilliant the discussions and the speakers have been this evening. So thank you to all of our speakers for joining us this evening. Thank you for your time, for your effort. You know, we appreciate you joining us, and I think this was a really engaging, informative discussion, and we've had loads of questions that we'll hopefully be able to send out to you, you know, following this webinar, and hopefully get some answers for some of our attendees. Thank you to you, our audience members, for your contributions and for joining us this evening, and also to the behind the scenes team who have worked hard to put this together and make sure that everything runs smoothly tonight. Doing things online, as I'm sure everybody is aware, comes with difficulties, you know, so I'm glad that this has, you know, gone very smoothly tonight. Charlotte, who is our moderator in the chat, has just put a lot of information about what's happening post-webinar and how you can get in touch with us. So you can find out more about Walsall for All by signing up to our newsletter via our email, walsallforall@walsall.gov.uk, and also about the Community Dialogue project that is run by Jayshree's organisation, the Faith and Belief Forum. The charity that Jayashree works for is running that project, so please do have a look at that. It's an opportunity to come together with people from across Walsall to talk about the things that are important to you as residents. We will post a link in the chat. Like I said, we'll also be sending out a follow-up email with all this information after the webinar and a feedback form. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us, and good night.